Good morning, Central Kentucky. This is Sandra Leslie White coming to you live from WJMM Studios here just outside of Lexington, Kentucky. Shouting out to all of you around the country, WJMM.com and Facebook Live this morning. Good morning. Those of you listening in today heard the end of the song that I played yesterday, Against the Wind. This version was actually the one I posted on my Facebook page with Jason Aldean and Bob Seger just last year. I think he was about 74 or something in that music video on YouTube. It's awesome if you want to check that out. Sandra Leslie White Ministries Facebook page. You can see that there, and all my shows are archived there. So today is Against the Wind 2. Number 2. We're going to continue on with Against the Wind this morning as we go into Hosea 5, 2-4 again, and then we're going to really look at Hebrews 12, 1-3, and talk about being against the wind in our culture today. So in that song, for those of you who are not listening in, maybe you were watching here on Facebook, but the song really goes through this progression, with Bob Seger, and I love that song. He talks about a relationship, and they were against the wind when they were young and strong, and then he kind of talks about when he, I guess, midlife, I don't know, when he lost his way and he found shelter against the wind, and then the end of that song, which is what we just heard on the air, is about as he got older, he's still running against the wind, but he's got deadlines and commitments. I guess he's become a man and responsible, but he's still running against the wind. So we talked yesterday and these last couple of days really about Hosea 5, 2-4, and this word, this phrase, spirit of harlotry, and what is really going on with God's people in Hosea and the entire book. And so we're going to just revisit that a little bit today, but go into running against the wind in our lives, in our culture, spiritually today. So let's jump into Hosea 5, 2-4. In the New American Standard Version this morning, it says this: "And the revolters have gone deep in depravity, but I will chastise all of them. I know Ephraim, and Israel is not hidden from me. For now, O Ephraim, you have played the harlot. Israel has defiled itself. Their deeds will not allow them to return to their God, for a spirit of harlotry is within them, and they do not know the Lord." All right, if you're just tuning in, this is Sandra Leslie White live this morning, coming to you from WJMM Studios here outside of Lexington, Kentucky, talking about Against the Wind in Hosea 5, 2-4. And so when we look at verse 4 here, and just in review quickly, this spirit of harlotry has entered into the people of God of the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel in the latter part of the 8th century BC. This is why the book is written. And, we've talked about this quite a bit. In verse 1, in chapter 1, we talk about Hosea's commission to marry a wife of harlotry, essentially have children of harlotry. And then the reason for it is because the land commits flagrant harlotry. So he's done this great prophet, this holy man, has married an unholy woman and had unholy children, apparently, that give us the illustration, the living parable about how God is with his people. How Hosea remains constant and faithful to a very wayward wife and wayward kids is pretty remarkable. And yet we look at God, we look at Yahweh, and at this point, he's explaining why this has happened. And he gets specific with a spirit of harlotry. That word spirit is the same word that is in 4:19, the wind, ruach in Hebrew. The wind wraps them in its wings, and they will be ashamed because of their sacrifices. Again, that's Hosea 4:19. So we looked at this as a spirit, as the wind can be physical and spiritual. And it is both in this instance. It's a dual force that comes against the people of God once they start participating with the pagan gods of their culture. The Canaanite gods have influenced them greatly, not only their worship, but their ways with Yahweh. And they have turned to particularly the temple prostitutes for their fertility in their fields and in their families. And they are doing abominable things on the high places. So we've talked about all that on my previous shows, but today, when we talk about being against the wind, against this spirit of harlotry which is within them, and these were God's people. Think about that. We talked about ministry of deliverance today. This is surely a Old Testament foundation for the fact that a spirit can be within God's people that is highly destructive, and then they not only are becoming just weakened by these spirits, but they also come to a point where they do not even know the Lord any longer. What a scary place to be. So I look at this and think about our own country and think about our own culture and the spirits that seem to be sweeping the land like the wind in its wings, and how it wraps us up into destructive ways that keep us from a genuine and authentic and really awesome not only relationship with God. It's so nice. Otto Thorwarth, the jockey that starred in the Secretariat movie, was on my show on Monday. I just love Otto. We're good friends. And he talked about that, just waking up in the morning with a clean conscience and a pure heart, and just not having to deal with guilt and shame and all that, which is the goal for a life in Christ. So this is where Yahweh is. He's in the Old Testament. He's in the latter part of the 8th century BC, pleading, showing, warning, rebuking his people, not for just his own pleasure, but to protect, provide, and become their priest, so that they have that whole life, emotionally, physically, spiritually, the wholeness of life in Yahweh. And so that is his goal. That's his goal for us. It's not to rain on our parade. It's not to crash our party. It's not to do anything destructive in our lives. It may feel that way sometimes. But he is about our good and his glory. So, to stand against the wind, this spirit, which can be either wind or spirit, it is both, as it is used within the Hebrew context of Hosea 5:4 and 4:19. So it has wrapped itself around them. They can't capture it. They can't contain it. They can't control it. They're out of control. Okay, they are deep in depravity. They're out of control. Have you been there? Have you been there? Well, I would venture to say many of us have, including myself. I've been there. And I know what it's like to be caught up in a wind of destruction, in a spirit that's trying to lead me into destruction. So let's look at how we are to stand against the wind. And those of you who may have tuned in late, I opened the show with the end of the song by Bob Seger, and Jason Aldean was in that duet with him sometime last year. Against the wind. How do we stand against the wind and the winds of destruction in our nation today? And there are many winds. It's not just the sexual immorality and harlotry that Hosea seems to be about, because remember, that sexual immorality is an equivalent to spiritual adultery in the Old Testament. So it's this leaving of Yahweh and his ways and interacting, literally having intercourse with pagan gods. So it's a combined force, and it's a powerful one. And if you don't think that's affecting our nation and the church today, then you are doing what I wanted to do, which was disappear, live on a farm, and watch vegetables grow. I say that quite a bit on the show, but it's really where I was before I stepped into a new career in a radio show last year. So here we go in Hebrews 12, 1-3. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you may not grow weary and lose heart. That's Hebrews 12, 1-3. We're talking about standing against the winds of destruction in our country today, in our culture today, in our church today, in our community, in our families. Standing against the winds of destruction, these spirits that Satan is behind to absolutely lure us and destroy us, destroy our lives, our families, our businesses, our country. So I think we see a formula here, and oh, by the way, I'll shout out to my beautiful daughter and new son-in-law, Susanna and Sean McFeely this morning. This was a passage that I actually read at their wedding a couple of weeks ago, and it was such an honor to read the word at my daughter's wedding. And this was so important as I looked into their eyes and read this, because we are all against the wind. As believers, we're against the winds of destruction. They have a call on their lives. Sean once said at a bar, when he was at a conference out in California, he was at a bar and he talked to a guy and said, you know what, my marriage is going to stand against divorce in our nation today. And so, wow, right there, I believe that's when the winds of destruction are going to start coming at him. And so when we look at this, we have a great cloud of witnesses around us, and if we really do. I mean, that's the body of Christ. But we have to lay aside our encumbrances. We have to be really self-aware and lay aside the sin that so easily entangles us. And you and I know what that is in our lives. We've got to run with endurance the race that's set before us. So that's against the wind, running with endurance. How do we do it? Fix our eyes on Jesus, because he's the author and perfecter of it. And for the joy set before him and us, we will endure this. We'll despise the shame, all the problems we'll have, all the bad comments on Facebook, all the hurls, of insults against us, for the joy set before us. Because we got to consider Jesus, don't we? When we grow weary of this and we just want to go into the shelter, go back to the farm, just don't deal with this. We grow weary, but we must not lose heart. There are times when we must retreat. We must regather ourselves. We must rest. And then we must go back out against the winds of destruction in our nation today. So I want to encourage you as we move on into Hosea chapter 5 in the coming days, that we all stand against the wind. God bless you today, and we'll talk with you again soon.